I will start introducing 3 books for you. A few years ago, I couldn't find Turkish of these books. This is why I bought them from Amazon.com. These books are called The Midwife, Shadows of the Workhouse, Farewell to East End. They are the memories of Jennifer Ward, writer of these books. When she was working as a midwife in 1950s in the poorest part of London. She talks about birth stories, family stories, and structure of all that time, and she does research very well about institutions, laws, the thesis, and the history of them, and social matters and changes of the social matters. And I think these books are not for very young children because they describe some graphic things about conditions and diseases. This is the book, and I will read a little part of the book. Nonato's house was situated in the heart of the London Docklands. Nonato's house. The midwife of St. Raymond Nonatus is a pseudonym. St. Raymond Nonatus is patron saint of midwives, obstetricians, pregnant women, childbirth, and newborn babies. The practice covered Stepney, Limehouse, Millwall, the Isle of Dogs, Cubic Town, Poplar, Bow, Mile End, and Whitechapel, parts of London. The area was densely populated by most families had lived there for generations, often not moving more than a street or two away from their birthplace. Family life was lived at close quarters, and children were brought up by a widely extended family of aunts, grandparents, cousins, and older siblings, all living within a few houses or at the most streets of each other. Children would run in and out of each other's homes all the time, and when I lived and worked there, I cannot remember a door ever being locked except at night. Children were everywhere, and the streets were their playgrounds. In the 1950s, there were no cars in the back streets because no one had a car, so it was perfectly safe to play there. There was heavy industrial traffic on the main roads, particularly those leading to and from the docks, but the little streets were traffic-free. The bomb sites were the adventure playgrounds. Bombs from Second World War. They were numerous, a terrible reminder of the war and the intense bombing of the Docklands only 10 years before. Great chunks have been cut out of the terraces, each encompassing perhaps 2 or 3 streets. The area will be roughly boarded off, partly hiding a wasteland of rubble with bits of building and half standing, half fallen. Perhaps a notice stating danger, keep out, would be nailed up somewhere. But this was like a red rug to a bull, and any lively lad over the age of about 6 or 7, and every bomb site has a secret entrance where the boarding was carefully removed, allowing a small body to squeeze through. Officially no one was allowed in, but everyone, including the police, seemed to turn a blind eye. It was undoubtedly a rough area. Knifings were common. Street fights were common. Pub fights and brawls were an everyday event. In the small, overcrowded houses, domestic violence was expected. The vast majority of men living in the area worked in the docks. Employment was high, but wages were low, and the hours were long. Early marriage was the norm. There was a high sense of sexual morality, even prudery, amongst respectable people of the East End. Unmarried partners were virtually unknown, and no girl would ever live with her boyfriend. If she attempted to, there would be hell to pay from her family. What went on in the bomb sites or behind the dustbin sheds was not spoken of. If a young girl did become pregnant, the pressure on the young man to marry her was so great that few resisted. Families were large, often very large, and divorce was rare. Intense and violent family rows were common, but husband and wife usually stuck together. Few women went out to work. The young girls did, of course, but as soon as a young woman settled down, it would have been frowned upon. Once the babies started coming, it was impossible. An endless life of child rearing, cleaning, washing, shopping, and cooking would be her lot. Contraception, if practiced at all, was unreliable. It was left to the woman, who had endless discussions about safe periods, slippery elm, gin and ginger waste, hot water douches, and so on. But few attended any birth control clinic, and from what I heard, most men absolutely refused to wear a shirt. Washing, drying, and ironing took up the biggest part of a woman's working day. Washing machines were virtually unknown, and tumble dryers had not been invented. The drying rides were always festooned with clothes, and we midwives often had to pick out our way through a forest of flapping linen to get to our patients. Once in the house or flat, there would be more washing to duck and weave through. In the hall, the stairways, the kitchen, the living room, and the bedroom, laundrettes were not introduced until the 1960s, so all washing had to be done by hand at home. By the 1950s, most houses had running cold water and a flushing lavatory in the yard outside. Some even had a bathroom. The tenements, however, did not, and the public washhouses were still very much in use. Public washhouses are like Turkish baths. Tenements are very small places and primitive places people live in. Most houses had a wireless, but I did not see a single TV set during my time in the East End. The pubs, the men's clubs, dances, cinemas, the music halls, and dog racing were the main forms of relaxation. For the young people, surprisingly, the church was often the center of social life, and every church had a series of youth clubs and activities going on every night of the week. All Saints Church in the East India Dock Road, a huge Victorian church, had many hundreds of youngsters in its youth club, run by the rector and no less than 7 energetic young curates. They needed all their youth and energy to cope, night after night, with activities for 500 or 600 young people. The thousands of seamen of all nationalities that come into the docks did not seem to impinge much upon the lives of the people who lived there. We keep ourselves to ourselves, the locals said, which meant no contact. The otters were carefully protected. There were plenty of brothels to cater for the needs of the seamen. In my work, I had to visit 2 or 3 of them, brothels, and writer found them very creepy places to be in. Life has changed irrevocably in the last 50 years. This book is written in 2008. My memories of the Docklands bear no resemblance of what is known today. Family and social life has completely broken down, and three things occurring together within a decade ended centuries of tradition: the closure of the docks, slum clearance, and the pill, birth control. Slum clearance started in the late 1950s while I was still working in the area. No doubt the houses were a bit grotty, but they were people's homes and much loved. I remember many people, old and young, men and women, holding a piece of paper from the council informing them that their houses or flats were to be demolished, and they were to be rehoused. Most were sobbing, they knew no other words, and moved of 4 miles seemed like going to the ends of the earth. The pill was introduced in the 1960s and modern woman was born. Women were no longer going to be tied to the cycle of endless babies. The closure of the docks occurred gradually over about 15 years, but by about 1980 the merchant ships came and went no more. The men clung to their jobs, the unions tried to defend them, and there were numerous doctors' strikes during the 1970s. But the writing was on the wall. In fact, the strikes, far from protecting jobs, merely accelerating the closures. For the men of the area, the docks were more than a job, even more than a way of life. They were, in fact, life itself. And for these men, the world fell apart. The ports, which for centuries had been the main arteries of England, were no longer needed. And therefore the men were no longer needed. This was the end of the Docklands as I knew them. Now she's talking about the history of midwifery in England. In 1902, the first Midwives Act was passed and the Royal College of Midwives was born. The work of the midwives of St. Raymond Nenatus was based upon a foundation of religious discipline. I have no doubt that this was necessary at the time, because the working conditions were so disgusting and the work so relentless that only those with a calling from God would wish to undertake it. Florence Nightingale records that when she was in her early 20s, she saw a vision of Christ, telling her that her life was required for this work. The St. Raymond midwives worked in the slums of the London Docklands, amongst the poorest of the poor, and for about half of the 19th century, they were the only reliable midwives working there. They labored tirelessly through epidemics of cholera, typhoid, polio, and tuberculosis. In the early 20th century, they worked through 2 world wars. In the 1940s, they remained in London and endured the Blitz, which was its intensive bombing of the docks. Blitz's famous bombing of London in Second World War. They delivered babies in air raid shelters, dugouts, church crypts, and underground stations. This was the tireless, selfless work to which they had pledged their lives, and they were known, respected, and admired throughout the Docklands by the people who lived there. Everyone spoke of them with sincere love. Such were the midwives of St. Nonatus when I first knew them. in order of dance, fully professed and bound by the vows of poverty, chastity and obedience, but also qualified nurses and midwives, which is how I came to be among them. I did not expect it, but it turned out to be most important experience of my life.